And this is what we have for our agenda today.
Kelly, we are going to change the agenda. We're going to move the subcommittee reports down under Dr. Alan Ducketman's presentation.
Yep, I see that now. So I did the slides the correct way. I just forgot to change this part. So
right.
Sorry about that.
The actual agenda does have that change.
Yep, I just forgot to make it right there. Yeah.
That's okay.
Okay, so roll call and any community announcements. Brad?
Yep, I'm here. No community announcements.
Connie?
Yeah, I'm here. Looking forward to that national PFAS conference in Ann Arbor. I think that'll be really cool. That's it for me.
Thank you, Connie. And Dan said he wasn't going to be able to join. Daniel Burlingame. David Wynn. Gail Mansowitz said she wasn't going to be able to join. Gail Dugan. Jason.
I'm here. Nothing to report.
Yeah. Joe.
I'm here. Thank you.
John.
Yeah, I'm here. Ionia County is as far as the solid waste management committee, we're really stalled out and we're really just puttering along and not very healthily. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. I just want to give you an update that we're pretty stalled and we haven't transitioned yet to a materials management plan either. So we're kind of behind the ball.
Thank you, John. Lois. Lynn Knopf.
I'm here.
Thank you, Lynn. Lynn McIntosh was here. Mary Blanchard.
Yep, I'm here and I have an update. 3 years ago this month, Eagle, MPART, MDHHS held Holly, Michigan's only town hall. 1 year ago this month, we received an email from Abby Hendershot on behalf of Eagle Management before Phil Roos took over, refusing our citizen request to hold a meeting dealing with all water issues in Holly, instead of the town hall that they had told the village of Holly that was going to happen in March or April 2023. This past week, Eagle site lead for the Falk Road dump stated that they had completed installing 6 monitoring wells off site of the dump. Stacy Taylor spoke to her and understood that there may not be any further funding other than testing 10 homes, but not for PFAS. Yesterday, a small group of us attended Mike Mueller, our local representative, town hall or coffee hour, and we expressed our frustration in not having a meeting and our concern that it appeared that all issues were not being considered comprehensively. Stacy Taylor heard today that a meeting will be held locally with multiple politicians and agency staff, and we are very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And Pam?
Hello, I'm here.
And Patty Baldwin said she wasn't going to be able to join. Portia? Rick Burns? Rick Radisky?
Here.
Tamara?
Samara was not going to be able to attend.
Oh, that's right. She was one of them. Sandy?
Sandy is not attending as well.
Yep. Shalene? Stacy?
Yep, Stacy Taylor's here. Mary did a pretty good summary of where we're at. But for the first time, envelope.
You were kind of breaking up there, Stacy. But I think you said Mary did a good job.
Yep, she did a pretty good job, or summary of where we're at. But for the first time in multiple years, I have a little bit of hope.
Thank you, Stacy. Tony?
Yes, I'm here. As for updates, we have a restoration advisory board at meeting at Wordsmith on Wednesday night. And getting back to Connie's comment, looking forward to the National PFAS Conference in Ann Arbor from June 9th through the 12th. And if any of you are interested but have not yet registered, urge you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Bill?
Bill is here. Hi, everybody. I just, sorry about the flurry of emails. I just want to, those will slow down. I just wanted you to know that there was some activity up here that I found by FOIAing the city. I've been chatting with some Eagle folks, have been very cooperative, helpful, and open to discussions. An EPA worker, Catherine Neal, also very friendly and transparently. Eagle folks, at least one of them recommended that I FOIA for some things, so I've done that. Our city came out, the city of Cadillac, it had a Superfund site, actually two of them. One of them was a plating company, and in '87 there was an agreement to have a bunch of property owners pay for the cleanup and sort of avoid the usual one polluter pay, and they never really pinpointed it. They apparently didn't look for PFAS back then, but it was a plating company, and went through a lawsuit. I sent a case just if you guys wanted to see how egregious the conduct of the company was, just pouring chemicals into the ground basically, and or to the sewer. In any event, the city out of nowhere a couple of weeks ago at a city council meeting, the city manager does his report. And he just summarizes updates, and he said, "Hey, just want to let everyone know we denied regulators access to our LDFA system, which is the cleanup system. There's 18 wells. I think Eagle went around the wells and did their own test in that area, and frustrated they're blocking, but there were 4 samples taken in 2021 and tons of, I won't say tons, it was tiny amounts, but it was PFAS, 7 chemicals in one. I think they added up to 25. They're low numbers. However, they're out of compliance with the federal levels, and they're going to be pulled into compliance. And the city manager sounded like he had just denied them, and it appears that he denied them back in 21. Which looked terrible in the newspaper. It looked terrible on TV 9 and 10. It just got, this, everybody's like, why is the city hiding whatever's going on? And it was right above our municipal wells for years. And it never, for whatever reason, merged together or connected, even though it was like Swiss cheese over there. We didn't ever have any positives for the big chemical they had. PFAS has not shown up in our municipal wells. Our wells are moved to 2 locations, one next to close to my house here, and on another one on the other side of town. So they have a new well system in for the city. So we're away from the industrial park. Herring's moving their wells and had to put out a $2 million system for areas right over by the Clam River. In any event, I just thought it was odd that the city manager would admit to this. What he didn't admit is that they were holding on to tests that showed PFAS, didn't announce that, didn't announce that the state went ahead with the EPA and tested anyway in 2021 and in 22. And the city did not share those 22 results. Those were also positive for a number of PFAS chemicals. So we have just omission by the city manager where he's talking about this, and he failed to mention the rest of the story, which is, and they're trying to close down the upper aquifer wells, some of them, and push is going to come to shove. And this is not an Eagle site, it is an EPA site, so it's their problem. And Eagle, I think, supported and helped them get some testing. But I did appeal their findings, and there's a meeting Monday night. And anyway, I did put a FOIA into the DEQ. It's not to be nasty or anything. I just want to see what they have and what is out there that maybe the city's not shared. The city forgot to show me about 4 or 5 meetings, and I asked them to find them because I could tell there were prior meetings about the LDFA, who meets rarely. It's a 10-member board. They have had 4 members on it that would show up on a regular basis and do business. But anyway, we have a PFAS story. It's low numbers, but it's under 30 years after the plating company is shut down. And that is moving toward the township, right to their municipal wells that now have to deal with the EPA standards. And they're in the process of moving their wells. The new well they tested out there shows clean, but they don't know for sure until they get it going. So they're taking a heck of a risk out there. And I think they're putting it in a bad spot, but that's their business. And they did extend the water to John R. Street and the Career Tech Center, which both had strange positives that didn't match up with what across the street was happening in people's homes. And the YMCA is out there with a big swimming pool, and they've tested negative because apparently they have a really deep well. Sorry for all the lengthy explanation. There's just some things happening up here, and the city not being transparent. You would think they would have brought this up, and they're trying to protect industry and the property owners, and they don't want the system that was set up to clean something else to get involved in this cleanup too. Even though it was one of those folks, presumably the Northern Air site, which had an ugly lawsuit that's worth reading, that I sent out. But anyway, I think I've shared everything I had, both in emails and with my comments tonight. And thank you all for reading those if you did, or passing them by as well. But I just found it very interesting that there was a failure to disclose by our city. And then even when they talked about the blocking the tests, they still didn't talk about the prior test that had PFAS, and their awareness for the last 3 years and not telling anybody was just a good example of handling something the wrong way. Thank you.
Thanks for your perseverance, Bill. Appreciate that. I
You're
know your
welcome.
community does as well.
I have my detractors, but yes, thank you. Like the
Thank you,
property
Bill.
owners.
We had 13 members on at roll call. And then, Mary, I'll hand it over to you to
Thank you.
introduce.
Appreciate that. And this month, the COG is very fortunate to have a presentation by Dr. Alan Ducketman. Sandy is not here, but she knows Dr. Ducketman very well. And she had said to the COG that Dr. Ducketman is the person that probably knows the most about blood testing and health effects of PFAS. He was instrumental in the C8 study in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and the NASEM report. His presentation is always impressive and makes everyone think. And last month, Dr. Ducketman presented to the GeoPan group, Great Lakes PFAS Action Network, and we enjoyed his presentation so much, we asked him to come and present to the COG. Thank you, Dr. Ducketman.
Thank you. Can I be heard clearly, or do I need to wear my earphones and speaker kit?
I think we can hear you.
Good, excellent. Okay, well, I'll start out by mentioning I'm a physician. First of all, thank you for that kind introduction. And also thank you for agreeing to drive the PowerPoints for me so that you don't have to watch an old man fumbling around with sharing his screen. I'll start out by mentioning that mentioning my conflicts of interest, which physicians, I'm a clinician, always do. And as has already been mentioned, I helped design the C8 Health Project way back when in 2005. And since then, I've published a number of papers about PFAS, of course, and I've participated, and these are the conflicts of interest, as both a paid and unpaid consultant to communities seeking medical monitoring benefits following PFAS contamination. And currently, I'm also assisting the attorneys for the state of North Carolina who are affected by PFAS, which is a state affected by PFAS contamination, just as many states are. And I probably have some others I could mention, but you get the idea. And now, next PowerPoint, please. The goals of this presentation are to discuss sources, to discuss related, so the sources of PFAS, so they can be prevented, health outcomes, and addressing both patient and community concerns, and then health communications and the need for clarity, and then a subsidiary goal, as always, because there's so much to say and so little time to say it, is to demonstrate lecturing as an aerobic sport. Next PowerPoint, please. So we're talking about a really large family of tree of compounds. There's probably 2,000 of them or more that have been made. There's probably 500 of them or so that have some commercial use. There's probably 50 or so that are common in commercial use. And we know a great deal about 4 to 6 of them. Many have just little or no health information, and many are not even detected by the current methods for detecting them, for example, in water or air. And of course, we know the most about the legacy compounds, such as PFOA and PFOS and PFNA. Next, please. It's worth spending a couple of minutes on historic sources and uses. This topic could be a 2-hour talk all by itself, and it's actually really important because it's understanding the sources and uses such as chrome plating, which has already been mentioned, mist suppression and chrome plating, that leads us to understand where we might experience contamination either from industry or in our own homes. And of course, there's food packaging and medical devices and home barrier insulation with specialty paints. And I just learned recently that the insulation that underlines lots of landfills or underneath hydraulic fracking will, of course, that barrier fabric, the geofabric, will of course be loaded with PFAS. I hadn't thought about it, but now that once it was published, it became obvious that would be the case. Paper coatings, specialty paper, and especially for food wrappings, but also other things. Fabrics and carpets, outdoor wear and leather goods. For those of you who are as old as I am, you can remember when if you spilled something on the carpet or the drapes or your leather, it was ruined. Or if the leather got wet, it was ruined. And that's not the case anymore. And that's about PFAS. Adhesives, including carpet backing. Don't put your carpets on a heated floor. Ski wax and bike lubes. For those of you who have pianos indoors or harps, piano tuning equipment. Electronics, solar panels, elastomeric coatings for electrical cables. I could go on. We could spend a lot of time. The most common source of contamination, of course, are those aqueous foams that fight particular types of particularly jet fuel fires where water alone won't put it out. And these may contain a complex, increasingly complex mixture of PFAS. And of course, around airports, there's lots of pollution. And then there's some really frivolous uses, shaving, cosmetics, flosses, lip balms, lipsticks, things that just have no business having PFAS in them at all, but where it makes a good product. Next, please. There's a large array of historic sources and uses, as I've mentioned, but a thing to know is that if you review the most prestigious modern journals, such as Science or Nature, at least once a month, you can find some really good new use that's going to lead to a patent, that may be a very important new use that's important to our society and that relies on PFAS for its implementation. And so these things are not going away. We really have to learn and figure out how we're going to control them, or else we have to learn to live without some very useful products, such as really useful microelectronics. And it's very useful in that context to think about essential uses and then how to control the PFAS from those essential uses and non-essential uses. And I've already talked about that a little bit. Next PowerPoint, please. In 2016, we thought there were about 6 million Americans with impacted water. And this is the common map that we would show at that time. And I've given the source here. Next, please. And of course, both with new regulation and with new exploration by various agencies, we think it may be approaching 100 million Americans who may be impacted. And we're talking now about a very expensive across society cleanup task. And something to mention at this point is that some of the replacement compounds are actually a lot more mobile in water, a lot more mobile in air, and a lot harder to clean up from the water and therefore more expensive. And so that's something to be thinking about as we look down the road to future results from PFAS use. Next, please. And of course, internationally, we know the most about the US and Europe, and to a lesser degree, parts of China and Australia, especially the industrialized parts of China. But where people look for PFAS, they tend to find them. And of course, we also know that PFAS migrate through food webs very well, so that they're found in Inuits and polar bears. And there are very few societies which are, I think there are probably no societies which are unimpacted by internal contamination with PFAS. Next, please. Here in Michigan, one could say that either Michigan or perhaps Minnesota, probably Michigan, have done the most complete job detecting PFAS on a statewide basis. So kudos for the state on task one, which is measures. Michigan is a national leader. Of course, following measures, there's task two, which is intervene as needed. I won't say much about Michigan's role in that. And there's federal regulations published, I think, last month that propose that we're going to have to deal with these nationally, which makes sense from a health perspective, and which will have a lot of implications across many water systems, and doesn't really clarify in my mind where well owners are going to fit in the problem of having clean water. Next, please. And of course, implementation, publishing the EPA regulations is not the same thing as implementing them. There are there's Congress, there's the executive branch, and there's the judicial branch, and all of them may have something more to say before there's any implementation. Common patient concerns that have come to me over years as a clinician. I no longer see patients in the clinic. I still talk to patients who have concerns about PFAS, but not as my patients. And the number one is cancer, followed by human development, birth defects, developmental delays, transgenerational exposure, and the difficult topic of pregnancy timing, if one is heavily contaminated, or choosing to breastfeed or not breastfeed if one is heavily contaminated, or whether PFAS are the potential explanation for failure to be able to breastfeed, which based on the data is actually quite plausible. Infertility, again, quite plausible based on the data. Lipids and liver outcomes, and stress. It's surprising how often physicians hear about patient stress based on topics about property value, the stress of maintaining filtration equipment, guilt concerning letting one's family, children, husbands, wives, extended family be exposed and not being aware of the problem. Essentially, guilt is the topic there. The goals are obviously primary prevention, get clean water, get water filtration where needed, For breastfeeding and pregnancy timing, what's needed is just honest advice. We normally recommend, despite the problems of PFAS, that women do not delay that they do breastfeed and that they do not delay their pregnancy timing if they're planning to become pregnant. Having said that, it's very important to have the conversation, to acknowledge the concerns, and if people are still concerned, to talk to them about options, and there are some. Ways to decrease risk and ways even to remove internal contamination, which include volunteer as a regular blood donor, a topic which can remove PFAS, but have some ethical issues because somebody's getting that blood. Of course, it's only a unit at a time. Or take something like a bile acid sequestrant, such as cholestyramine, which is much more efficient than being a blood donor, but it's taking a medication. Next PowerPoint, please. This on the right, and it's probably hard to read, shows the data for cholestyramine, which is like kryptonite for PFOS, and does a pretty good job for the other legacy PFAS. Really quite effective for people taking it in the large community C8 health study. Wasn't a lot of people. It's a very old-fashioned, uncommon medication, but for those taking it, really did the job. Wasn't why they were taking it. It just happened to do the job. And of course, regular phlebotomy also works, and both of them have clinical trial level evidence to show that they work. Having said that, neither of them has clinical trial level evidence to show that you're better off if you do it, and we will never have that data. It would take a massive clinical trial, which is never going to happen, to show that yes, you're actually better off. It would cost millions to do that. It's never going to be studied that way. So it's a thing one can do. It doesn't mean we know that you're better off doing it. We know it works, but it doesn't mean we know you're better off. Next, please. Now, most of you probably already know that women of reproductive age, say age 12 to a little bit after menopause, say around age 52, because of the long half-life of PFAS, have lower PFAS. And there's three reasons, and one is great. That's menstruation. That's sort of the same as phlebotomy, same kind of topic. You're losing your PFAS through a natural process. But the other two aren't so great. That's transplacental transfer and breastfeeding, and that leads to the kinds of patient concerns that I sometimes hear when talking to patients or to individuals in communities, and they're very real concerns. Next, please. And the things that we know about health outcomes began to be clarified by the massive C8 Health Project, and these are the probable links as announced by the science panel. I wasn't a member of the science panel. I published some of their studies with them, as well as some independent of them from the data. But these are their findings, which include hypercholesterolemia, thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, testicular cancer, kidney cancer, and pregnancy-induced hypertension. For those 6 outcomes, which were announced between approximately 2012 and 2015, the data are only stronger for hypercholesterolemia, testicular cancer, and kidney cancer. They're probably at least as strong, but slightly different for ulcerative colitis, and they're more nuanced for thyroid disease. Pregnancy-induced hypertension is probably about the same. Next, please. More data, but still sometimes confusing. And we've added some new topics, such as liver toxicity. There's very little doubt that PFAS, in addition to messing with our lipids, which are mostly metabolized in the liver, mess with the liver in other ways. And they're also associated with higher uric acid, which doctors call hyperuricemia if it gets high enough. And that can be related to gout. And all of those things have been related to some PFAS exposure, most commonly PFOA. Next, please. The California basis for their PFAS health goals for PFOA are listed on the top, on the left, with the human data on the top left and the animal data on the bottom left, and for PFOS on the right. And you can see it's pretty much the same stuff, but it also includes immune system toxicity and then some animal data having to do with reproductive toxicity. And frankly, there's also human data about reproductive toxicity for those outcomes, which we could discuss if it's of interest. Next, please. When I talk either to scientists or to the lay public about PFAS, I give what my taxonomy is for saying there's increased risk. Scientists sometimes use the word substantial or sufficient. They sometimes use the word moderate or limited, or they sometimes use the word at or above. Equipoise, that is to say, more likely than not. And physicians tend to use the word more likely than not. And more likely than not carries all three PFAS categories, but for some of them, we're near certain. Next slide, please. Such as immunotoxicity and altered liver lipid profile. We're near certain. And then at a level below that, but still lots of evidence, kidney cancer and liver function and liver toxicity and thyroid alterations, but a little more complicated when we get to thyroid disease. So we can talk about that if it's of interest. And uric acid and hyperuricemia. And then there's substantial evidence, enough to say more likely than not, in my view, for diminished capability to breastfeed, male fecundity, fertility. Fecundity is time to pregnancy if we're trying to become pregnant. Insulin resistance and diabetes, kidney disease in addition to kidney cancer, osteoporosis, preeclampsia, pregnancy-induced hypertension, testicular cancer, ulcerative colitis, and diminished birth weight. And then there's some or conflicting evidence for this longer list. Fecundity or fertility for women is on that side of the line, in my view, today, although it may be moving over because there's increasing evidence about that as well. Next PowerPoint, please. And so this is sort of the money slide from this presentation. So why? Why all these things? One of the reasons is called signaling. If we want to if you want to anthropomorphize the cells in our bodies, our cells think that PFAS are messages to up or down regulate very specific and strong cell functions, so that the PFAS act as like magnifiers for things that our cells are inclined to do anyway, but in a certain direction. And another reason is membrane effects. The PFAS mess with our membranes, and they mess with the ability of our mitochondria to produce energy. And this is across almost all of the different PFAS that we see in toxicology studies for which we have any data, either in vivo, that would be in animals, or in vitro, that would be in Petri dishes. Next, please. Now, an interesting topic that I get asked about quite a bit, and which is finally getting better, is health communications and inadvertent obfuscation of what PFAS do, which I try to avoid, but it's hard to avoid. Science terms serve the comfort of scientists, and they tend to be things like sufficient evidence or moderate evidence or limited evidence. And limited evidence is a very wide range in practice. And some things with limited evidence are official IARC class 1 carcinogens. So what you hear about, what you think limited evidence means, may not be what it really means. And yet the word gets obscured in disputes about PFAS all the time. And so I try to use easier to understand terms like more likely than not to cause an outcome. And there's some major misunderstandings around this. And I've even written a commentary that's in the literature about this, which I would like to think influenced at least some federal agencies. Next PowerPoint, please. And I'll read to you a communication. Some of you are aware of where this is from. That was actually current until quite recently. PFAS have not been proven to cause any specific illnesses in humans. To date, there's not enough information available to definitively say what, if any, health effects may be caused by exposure to PFAS. This agency asked the National Academy of Sciences to essentially make recommendations concerning health communications and medical monitoring. And the National Academy of Sciences did. And very recently, this agency updated and improved, I won't say fully improved, but made much better its health communications. Next, please. So there's still some tendency to dismiss hard evidence. part of that is that regulatory and research agencies are increasingly understaffed for many roles. Their budgets are effectively smaller, but their roles and missions are effectively larger than they were 30 years ago. And their pay grades are no longer commensurate with what it takes to maintain a good scientific staff. So it's hard to get too far down on these agencies. On the other hand, they do need feedback from folks like you and me and all of us if their health communications are off target. And I need that feedback too. Vigilance, which is the icon on the right, is always required about health communications. Next, please. Based on health outcomes, some communities in the US have received medical monitoring benefits. Now, that's not as primary important as cleaning up the water. Cleaning up the water is primary prevention. Medical monitoring is at most secondary prevention. It's looking for early detection of disease so we can intervene and mitigate and prevent the worst outcomes of diseases. And an interesting thing to talk about in front of an MPART audience, and I talked about this before, is that in Michigan, there's this interesting Supreme Court decision, and the outcome, as I understand it, boils down to something like this. One must be harmed before one can seek redress from risk, such as medical monitoring. And of course, medical monitoring is seeking early evidence of that harm, which you can't seek until you are harmed. And so it's this crazy circular logic that says medical monitoring can't exist in Michigan. So medical monitoring so far is in other states. And I've helped people in other states who are less exposed in some cases than some people in Michigan to get medical monitoring. Next, please. Now, most of what we've mentioned, I've already mentioned that most of what we know about health effects is about the legacy compounds, especially PFOA and PFOS. The replacement compounds, of which there are numerous examples, including and not limited to Gen X, tend to have shorter half-life. I say tend to because it's not always the case. Therefore, it's a hope that they will have lower toxicity. In case I forget to mention it later, I'll say now, hope is not a great basis for public policy. And therefore, they're also a little bit harder to study in humans because we don't have that biomonitoring signal, because some of them don't have long enough half-lives, but some of them do. And unfortunately, we're already seeing early evidence that some of them, especially some of the contaminants, such as PFO405 DOA, which is a complicated ether compound, we're already seeing some evidence that even in humans, there's evidence already that this may not be the best. We may have some unwise substitutions, regrettable substitutions. And then I've already mentioned they're even faster moving in water, further migrating in the atmosphere and harder to filter. Next, please. But the physiology in toxicology studies, it's not necessarily very different. It's often quite similar, and that's not so good. Next, please. Now, let me give you a perspective. This is my personal perspective. It's kind of unscientific, so permit me to speak in unscientific terms for a minute. If an evil genie gave us the choice of being exposed to a pack a day of cigarette smoke or PFAS at the level of some of our contaminated communities, I would choose to be exposed to PFAS. I think, based on what I know so far, that a pack a day smoking is a worse killer, maimer of humans. Having said that, there's a lot we don't yet know about PFAS. I compare them more to polychlorinated biphenyls and dioxins, but in some ways that's not a good comparison either, because polychlorinated biphenyls and dioxins, and PBBs, which were a particular problem years ago in Michigan, the polychlorinated biphenyls we usually talk about, but the polybrominated biphenyls were a big problem in Michigan when I was a medical student in Michigan a long time ago. They tend to be stay-at-home, whereas I've already mentioned that PFAS are compounds with happy feet. So the PCBs and the dioxins, they tend to stay in the soil more or less where they're put. You can deal with them. PFAS, if you put them up the stack or put them in the water, the next thing you know, they're in polar bears and Inuits and all of us. Next, please. So here's my happy feet PowerPoint. They have the replacements have shorter half-lives. They tend to migrate faster. We hope they are safer. And I've already mentioned hope is a weak approach to public policy, especially given that the toxicology data so far are not that encouraging. The internal exposure levels may be lower for some of them, but I'm not sure that's enough to say that we're off the hook for very real problems in the future. I'd rather suspect the opposite. Next, please. Health communication challenges. Tough audiences tend to, in my view, some of the toughest audiences that I deal with, they're very polite, they're very interested, are water utility managers and others who are caught in the middle. And when you think about their role in the world, it's easy to understand. They're worried about another large task. They know that funding will probably be either inadequate for the task, or if it's adequate, it will come from the ratepayers, many of whom will be pissed as heck at the additional costs. They're not trained in chronic disease epidemiology and toxicology, so they have to take somebody else's word for it that is dangerous, which is a big change from the things that they're used to, which is things like E. coli, which are obviously dangerous. And they recognize that acknowledging the problem implies cost that will be passed on and for which they will be responsible in perpetuity, possibly with not a lot of support. It's kind of a Stockholm syndrome problem. And you can see the outcome of that. There's a really quite problematic World Health Organization document, which came from a combination of water managers and industry consultants, which essentially World Health Organization is probably now reorganizing. And it reflects this reluctance to address the problem, in my view. Tough audience, but you understand why. And that concludes my presentation. I hope it's on target for you, and I'd be happy to entertain questions on any of the topics or related topics for that matter.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ducketman. We already do have some hands. Let's see here.
Looks like Pam's got her hand up.
Okay, great.
Pam, you want to go ahead?
Pam?
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Duckman. It's been a while ago, but Dr. Mark Johnson from ASTDR from Region 5 and I had reached out. We tried to get a hold of you because we were doing some epidemiology studies trying to on myself. I was exposed and lived very close to the paper mill that's under fire right now here in Otsego. But I have a question to you about hyperhomocystinemia and exposure. I have the dual mutation and the MTHFR, the C677T. But Dr. Johnson kind of wanted to pick your brain about that because the homocysteine levels are like 216.0 opposed to the 0.10. Have you found in your research that there's a correlation? You know, I have 3 liver diseases as well. Could that be associated with PFAS exposure?
Well, there's about 3 different topics here, and one of them is hyperhomocystinuria, which is a topic which I would say puts one at increased risk. So I didn't talk about sensitive populations other than, you know, fetal exposure and newborn exposure, but there are a number of populations which are probably at higher risk. And I would say that people who have any abnormalities in that gene probably have reason to be concerned about risk. There's lots of data about PFAS and liver disease, or at least liver enzyme markers, as well as not just the single markers, but the things like if there's any other clinicians, things like the FIB4 and the FIB5 that we use to predict steatosis and steatohepatitis. And there's emerging data which is confusing and which may not suggest a problem concerning the actual liver imaging. in PFAS exposure. So that's all pretty complex stuff. But for homocysteine, there are a couple of laboratory papers. I don't remember exactly what they say, but they're out there. And if it were important, we could put our heads together and think about things that we could say or do in research. As for what an individual should do, I think all that an individual can do with the inevitability of having a gene mutation is to know that it probably does create some increased risk, and to be following their liver very carefully, which you would do anyway in that circumstance.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'd love to be able to reach out to you, my internist and my geneticist. This is unlike anything that they've ever seen, but I followed you, read a lot about your work in that, and I would love to be able to have a side conversation with you. And I appreciate
You're welcome to do that. And the easiest way to get me, my email is probably somewhere on this presentation, but if it's not, just type in Alan Ducketman WVU, and that will link to a way that it's an awkward way, but you can get me right away. So you don't have to remember, or somebody in this group will have my email. But let's not talk about any private, any medical stuff now, except to say that homocysteine is something in which I'm not expert. Your doctors are, but there are some laboratory data about homocysteine and PFAS in my memory.
Well, I appreciate that. We've been trying to find you for quite a while. You're a busy man.
Oh, I'm not that hard to find, but
thank you for coming tonight and doing the presentation.
Well, I live here in Michigan for now.
Thank you.
Joe?
Yes, thanks for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I live in Ann Arbor. Been drinking this city water for for decades. So one confusion I have, I'd like to get your expert the definition is if we look at the literature, people, I guess some professionals or not, talk as if there are definite links between the PFAS compounds and diseases. But looking at your presentation, there are some, I guess it's not all 100% proven yet. So for a non-medical person like me, what is the correct assessment of these links between PFAS chemicals and those diseases you covered?
Well, let's start with the word links. Given the contentious world of PFAS, where everything that happens in science can later be tied to policy, and then policy to politics, and then politics to money, people even fight about the word links and what that means. But what I answer to that is there are some outcomes for which we are pretty darn sure that some PFAS cause those outcomes. And I listed those. And if those things are overturned, which is always possible, I would be very surprised. And then other things where it's far more likely than not, and some other things where it's slightly more likely than not. And then a long list of things for which some of them will become more likely than not, but I'm not willing to say that yet. Okay. And I hope that slide helped with that. And it's a long list. And over time, it is more common for things to be added than for things to be subtracted. Unfortunately, that's for a compound like PFAS, which is so biologically active. I should say a word about the biological activity. PFAS are chemically inert for the most part, but they are biologically remarkably active because our bodies, again, to anthropomorphize, think they're something else. Thank you for putting that PowerPoint up. So I think that the things in those first two columns are all more likely than not, okay, left and center, especially on the left. That's extraordinarily strong evidence. And center is more likely than not. And then things that might someday be more likely than not are on the right, but I can't tell you which ones. So thyroid alterations are for sure. PFAS mess with our thyroid hormones, but do they cause thyroid disease? There you get into lots of nuances. And back to the word links, it turns out that plenty of official agencies use the word links to mean cause, including, if I remember right, IARC, International Agency for Research on Cancer. And I think I can even find it in some EPA documents. But that doesn't stop arguments between industry and others about the meaning of links, and that links isn't cause. How to put this? One other thing to say. In epidemiology, we don't actually study cause directly. We're not taking a population and feeding them a known amount of PFAS and comparing them to a population which has never been exposed to PFAS and following them in a cage for 20 years. We don't do that. Instead, we're making inferences that lead us to make inferences about causation based on both the epidemiology and the toxicology literature. And that's a very long, complex topic, which could be a discussion for another day. How do we do that? When I get deposed, that's one of the topics.
Thank you.
So just follow up. So you call this my view.
Yes.
So some other person with different motivations can have a different kind of table like this.
You nailed it. You said everything that's needed to be said.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll continue to drink the Ann Arbor water.
Tony.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. Tony Spaniola here. Thank you for your presentation. As always, good to see you. I want to just take a minute. I thank you in particular, well, for all of it, but for pointing out the importance of medical monitoring as a legal cause of action. And I know you and I've talked about this before. I want to just highlight it for a second and maybe ask you to comment. You are correct that in Michigan, we do not have a cause of action that permits medical monitoring. And there are currently bills in the legislature that would allow that to happen. And there's kind of a misinformation campaign that has now begun to discredit those efforts. And I just wanted to point out, and you can verify perhaps and maybe comment on the importance of it, but the C8 science study, which you were somewhat involved in, happened because of a medical monitoring cause of action. It was the result of a medical monitoring cause of action in the state of West Virginia. I believe that's right. And I just would ask that you comment on the significance of that and what you think the importance of that, bringing that to Michigan might be.
Well, you are technically quite correct, but the details do matter. That activity happened in two phases. The first phase had a large science study appended to it. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just medical monitoring. It was also very clearly intended to be research, and a tremendous amount of assets, we're talking about probably tens of millions of dollars, were directed towards enrolling 69,030 people, approximately 81% of the eligible people in the area who agreed to participate in that first phase. And then based on the findings of that first phase, then finally, after the science panel made its deliberations, there was a second phase, which had no research appended to it, which was just the health phase. And I have some thoughts about how that was set up, but they're West Virginia specific thoughts. We don't need to discuss them now unless you're interested in them. But that second phase, which was medical monitoring without research, is not well subscribed. And in my view, there's very specific reasons for it, that you can see the difference between the subscription levels there and in other places based on the way West Virginia and Ohio, because it's both states, it's along the Mid-Ohio Valley, the pollution's in both states. The second phase was set up, in my view, to fail.
Alan, and can you comment on the importance of having that type of a option in Michigan?
Oh, I think it would be wonderful. I mean, again, if an evil genie gave you a choice between clean water or medical monitoring, take clean water.
Sure.
More important. Primary prevention beats secondary prevention. But it would be wonderful to have medical monitoring, both for what it gives people, but in terms of disease prevention, but also for peace of mind. It gives people a way to participate in their care that I think is important. And the other thing about it is it's optional. And so, you know, people can choose to be in it or not. But when you tell people they can't have it, it upsets them and they get angry. And it's just yet another thing that PFAS imposes on them.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Tony. Good to talk to you. Good to talk to everybody.
Mary, I have a question. Can you hear me? This is Lynn.
Yep, I can.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask a question in regards to my friend who lives in Plainfield Township, whose family has experienced relatively low exposures for a long period of time. And my friend's husband has severe coronary artery disease, or I don't know what you say first. Cardiovascularly, his flow is limited very severely, and there's issues with cholesterol and some of the other health situations you brought up. And a question that arises for her in regards to her husband and to her two boys is there a benefit to the blood testing? Is there a benefit to having a number? Because the doctor, when they mention it to him, says, well, what difference would it make? It wouldn't change anything. And I don't know how to come around the answer to that. A lot of people will ask that question.
Right.
Well, I have a number.
And there's a bunch of answers, and that question could be its own lecture. And in fact, I have done entire lectures on that question. But in brief, I think blood testing is helpful for high exposure populations, not for the low exposure populations.
Okay,
and
that's
for
helpful.
that individual who already has all those problems, I kind of agree with, you know, what does that add? If the person wants to know, the individual should not be prevented. But if the person doesn't care, then there isn't that much benefit. Having said that, if the children were high exposure, I would immediately flip over that. I would immediately flip over and say, hey, you know, that's a different question. Now we're into primary and secondary prevention. Let's get those data. And remember, PFAS have a half-life. So if the family has stopped drinking the contaminated water for say 6 years and it's PFOS, they're 2 half-lives past where where their blood levels would have been the highest. And so then you do extrapolations. So, you know, there are different levels of benefit, and the circumstances dictate rather than one size fits all. Having said, you know, then the next thing is in a high exposure population, say an exposure population around a leather goods factory where there are astronomical levels, it would be very good to have medical monitoring for everybody if they wanted it. And people who didn't want it wouldn't need to participate. That would be a good thing. It would be good to be able to have that for a lot of reasons.
So can you differentiate that? I wonder how these two relate. There's high exposure and there's also long ongoing exposure at lower levels. Is it still the higher exposure?
Well, for medical monitoring, it's the higher exposure groups. And National Academy of Sciences actually, there are some things in their work that I think they could have done better, especially the liver part of it. And I actually know, I think, why they didn't do a great job with liver. But I think they did a nice job saying, you know, medical monitoring for people who have high exposure, and here's some levels. It's right in their document. And, you know,
Mhm.
that's not like it's not written on two tablets. It didn't come down from a mountain, but it's reasonable recommendations based on what we know today.
That makes sense. Yeah. Well, her son is already starting to follow some of the pathway of the father, so that's where the intervention or knowledge can make the most difference, probably.
Yes,
I think I
and you
hear
know,
you saying that.
medical
Mhm.
monitoring helps people to motivate. One thing I should have said is in medical monitoring
Mm-hmm.
programs, it's surprising how much we can help motivate people for really useful interventions that they ought to do anyway. So,
Yes. Right. I know. I hear what you're saying. Good old human nature.
yeah, but
Yeah.
it's a little
All
bit
right.
beyond that. We actually have evidence that those same interventions work when the problem is PFAS.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's been very helpful to hear your summary, and I know that's much more that you could say about everything, but thank you for all that you've clarified tonight.
You're welcome. And if there's are there further questions, or should I sign off so you can get on with the rest of your meeting?
Does anybody have any further questions for Dr. Ducketman? Abby?
I just have one. I appreciate your discussion of the whole controversy around how, you know, what it seems to be of how much science is enough science to really prove something. Because I find there's a whole universe of people out there that are, you know, on one side versus another side. And I feel like, at least from the state's perspective, our job is similar to what you've just said. Stop the exposure, make sure people have clean drinking water. We can fight about how much science is enough science to prove causational relationships. But I just appreciate that, because it's been one of those things rattling around in my mind. Is we've got all these people, especially after the MCLs just came out from EPA, as to whether or not 4 was the right number. Did they really have enough science? Did they really get it right? And all of those things. So appreciate your thoughts on all of that.
Another day we could talk about 4 versus New Jersey's, what was it, 11? You know, all of those are based on science and they're slightly different. And 4 is, of course, a compromise, because 0 would be better, but we can't do 0.
Yeah.
For a
And
lot
it's
of
all,
reasons.
and you know, the crazy thing, it's all based on the same science. We're just
Right.
interpreting it just a slightly different. So,
Well, I think this, in fairness, EPA looked at some newer science than New Jersey had and just lowered the standards based on increased confidence that the cancer data were real. And so there are some small differences, but the really important thing is let's filter the water, and let's not let the small differences stop that necessary move, just as you said. I mean, the important thing is to move ahead and make sure that the public is protected to the best of our ability. And it's going to be very expensive.
yes.
It's a non-trivial enterprise, unfortunately.
Yes. But better to have the data and make informed decisions than to, you know, I know some states have refused to do anything without federal guidance. And so we've chosen not to take that path, but you can see by the number of people we've got on this call, we've got a great community base here that's here to support all the actions and really believes in the mission. So, all right. Well, Mary, anything else?
I think that's it. And thank you so much,
Cool.
Dr. Ducketman. We
Okay, I'm
appreciate you
signing
coming
off.
on.
Thank you all for your attention.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure to talk with this group, and I'm always available. So, you know, I'm here for now.
We will share your email address. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks, Ellen.
Our next part of the agenda will be the subcommittee reports. Is there anybody who would like to report for the website review subcommittee?
Yeah, hi, this is Brad Venman. We did have our meeting today at 4:30, and we talked about some well, both the analytics of the MPART site, see kind of activities have had in the last month, but we also looked at some the new ride mapper. Look briefly at that. That's the Remediation Division's website that identifies different sites of contamination and the data that it's linked to. And the Michigan, the MEnviro, which is the permitting website. One of the things we talked about potentially doing is creating an additional page or a set of links that would allow people on our site, the MPART site, to link to the ride mapper and MEnviro websites. So so it's, if somebody's interested in finding out more details about sites of contamination in the vicinities, perhaps of the MPART sites, that's an easy transition. In addition, I had got some information from the Michigan University of Michigan School of Public Health. Sends out a number of different things periodically to its alumni, and one of the things that came out this last month was the MCARES, the Michigan Cancer and Research on the Environment Study, is recruiting volunteers to take survey and potentially give blood and saliva samples for testing for different things, depending on the results of their survey. And they're looking to try and recruit in two cohorts. This is the recruitment card, if you will, a postcard, if you will. Recruit people between the ages of 18 and 49 who live in Michigan. They have the first cohort, which would be 6 communities, Metro Detroit, includes Lansing, Saginaw, Flint, and Grand Rapids. And I might have missed one there, but and then the other cohort would be the rest of the state, and that would not everybody who volunteers would necessarily have blood and saliva samples analyzed, but it would provide information to look at different etiologies that are being expressed, cancers and different other health effects, and correlate them with what's found in the blood and saliva, and also looking at potential DNA markers. So I guess we are going to put this information as far as the links on the MCARE and the site itself. And I think I also summarized some of the information out of the survey that kind of explains what it's all about, and if somebody were to volunteer, but also provide people to reach out to people in community that might be interested in volunteering and being part of the research study. So that's going to be I think Kelly mentioned that we'd be able to post that on our website for us to access in the future if necessary.
Yes, so this will be, I will PDF the slides and it'll be posted in the slide material on the COG website.
All right, great. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Brad.
You bet.
For the prevention subcommittee, I don't believe Dave was on earlier. Is he on now?
I don't know, but Joe's got a question maybe on the previous information.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Just one quickie. So I want the gift card, but it says you got an age limit. I wonder
Brad, you gotta.
What's the scientific reason?
I was ready to volunteer, not for the $10, but I thought it was an interesting opportunity. But yeah, I'm too old also.
Thank you.
Oh, it's funny. Thanks, Joe. The engaging the public subcommittee. We did meet. It was a shorter meeting. There were just 4 of us, Rick Radisky, Kelly, Brandon Thomas from MDHHS, and myself. We discussed briefly part of the emails that we will discuss further in the meeting. And Kelly talked about an increase in the local official calls and the fact that the representatives and senators are tuning in and even requesting their own meetings for their area. And that's very encouraging, I think, that they're taking an interest and becoming informed before some of the legislative opportunities are coming up for that. So the next membership actually did not meet this month. Abby, would you like to go ahead with the MPART updates?
Yeah. Let's see what Kelly's got in the slides. I don't have a ton for this month, but Kelly can, there we go. We do have some new MPART sites. So we've got area of interest and a couple of other sites. So New Era Properties out in Walker is one that came in as a BEA. So that's a baseline environmental assessment. And so that one is posted. We got 2 areas of interest, Talmadge Township out in Ottawa County, in Athens, Village of Athens, area of interest, in Calhoun County. Those are both on the MPART website, but remember they don't, because it's an area of interest, it doesn't make the doesn't count as a source of PFAS. So we're still trying to identify sources at those 2 locations. And then the Hartley and Hartley landfill in Bay City. So that one obviously is a source. And so we did put that one there. All of these had lower levels, not terribly high levels of PFAS concentrations, but they all got run through our normal process. So any particular questions on those?
Abby, is it correct that it's 282 sites at this point?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
It is. It is. We're getting close. I mean, I would expect we'll probably be at 300 by the end of the year. So thank you, Kelly. And the Great Lakes PFAS Summit will happen again this December. So we are looking for abstracts. So if anyone is interested in submitting an abstract to talk at the PFAS Summit about, we've got a pretty wide variety of topics. Feel free to submit that in. It's on our MPART website. She's got the link here that'll be in the slide deck that she already sent to you as well. So feel free to submit that. I do believe that abstracts are due by July 1st. So, and usually we have enough room for like 25 of them-ish, something like that. So
this was actually a last minute slide, so it's not in your slide deck that I sent out earlier.
Oh,
because
okay.
this just came through this afternoon. So I'll just resend it in the email.
Okay.
So then you'll have Brad's slide and this one.
Yeah, because if we don't have a June meeting, then you'll just have this month to think about what you want to submit. So, or if you've got anybody else that's interested in this, feel free to submit that around or send that around to GLPAN or LCV or any of our other environmental advocacy groups. So, and those are really the big things that I have. I know we talked about MCLs last month, and at least I think we did. And we talked about the CERCLA changes. So I don't think I have too much else unless you guys have any specific questions for me. All right. Well, I'll let it.
Tony has one.
Tony's got his hand up. Go ahead, Tony.
Yes. Yeah, I just had one on I may have misunderstood, but I wanted to just check with you. It seemed to me that the fish standards in Michigan, that I was under the impression maybe that whoever sets those, I can't remember, DHHS or Eagle, were waiting until the MCL to see what happened with the MCLs Is
Yep.
that accurate? And do you have a sense of where that might be going, Abby?
Yes, that's currently in review, and will be, there's going to be some adjustments to that data that will be rolled out in the 2025 Eat Safe Fish Guide. But they're currently working through that process right now. So it's not going to, I haven't seen all of the information yet. So this is what I'm hearing, is that it's in process and we should be talking about it here fairly soon. Tony, I don't know if you heard the information we sent or gave about the PFAS and the bile acids. Did you read that My Environment story that came out?
You're talking about the Lake Superior?
The smelt. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that particular, we had 180 extra samples there that we're going to get into the Eat Safe Fish Guide for the 2024 version. That's going to delay the Eat Safe Fish Guide just a bit so that we can get all of that data in. Because it's updated data. We really wanted to make sure that got included in this year's thing. But then the next step of that will be reevaluating the rest of the fish advisories in consideration of that new toxicity value. But once we get to a firm spot, I will talk with DHHS about coming and giving a preview of that to the COG. So I wouldn't, probably this fall is what I'm thinking, Tony, but it wouldn't go into effect until 2025. Yeah.
Thanks for that information.
Yep. And we are having conversations with other states about what they're going to do as well with their fish advisories or with their, surface water values. So, because obviously it's a big change in toxicity values. So,
Thanks,
okay.
Abby.
I think I'm done then, Mary.
Okay. Did anybody have any other questions for Abby?
And feel free to go easy on me tonight. There's not much left, it feels like, so. All right,
think we're
looks
good.
Looks like I'm getting off easy.
Thanks, Abby.
Okay. Hey, Lynn.
So the next,
I think I'm gonna mute Lynn. Lynn, do you mind if I mute you for a minute? Getting a little bit
No,
of
that's fine. I thought I had tried to mute myself. Yes, you heard me going down a trail with my, yeah. Okay, got it. I'm glad.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. There we go. Okay, go ahead, Mary.
So I had sent out emails based on a conversation that Sandy and I had before she left town. And at that time, when we were going to meet as a leadership team, Jason was in the airport and waiting to take off. And I had technical difficulties where I was signed in to Sandy's Zoom, but then it ended up where my spinning ball froze. So we ended up just having a conversation and did some suggestions for topics. And some other members now have followed up on that. So I guess I will say that earlier in the year, I was optimistic based on our member meetings, the survey, and it seemed that more people were participating and speaking up during meetings. And I definitely appreciate our efforts that seem to be more geared to educating at this point, COG members and our presentations, even the information that comes from agency staff is very helpful. And our members then, some of them do take it back and share that education with their communities. But it seems to me that recently we're kind of losing momentum again. And I guess I'm being, concerned that we're being told that we need to leave the COG, which is a state level PFAS group, and engage with other groups in order to address PFAS issues. And, I'll just say, if I'm the only COG member that is frustrated with where this is going, I do belong to GeoPan and other environmental groups, and I'm fine with, working with those groups. And if other members of the COG are satisfied with our current activity of primarily education, then that's fine. But I guess I'm a little disappointed at this point that we're still running into the limitations that have been expressed. So, is there anybody else who wants to share their opinion?
I guess, Mary, just a question. When you say we're running into I'm not sure what limitations. Could you clarify what you mean?
Yeah, it just seems like when we have brought up like the well, specifically last month, when I mentioned about possibly bringing information on legislation, upcoming or proposed legislation, and, not as the COG as a whole to present something, but to share with our members so that they could go to their individual legislators and share that information. And it was said that, nope, that's not this group, that you have to go, to a different group. And I just think as a state level PFAS group, we should be able to share some of that information and other information. We should be able to share whatever we want.
Mary, can you hear me? I unmuted myself.
Oh, Lynn, I just called on Joe.
Oh, okay. I'm just here and just waiting.
Yeah,
Here.
you'll
Go
be
ahead.
next.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. Joe?
Yes, I guess I got a couple of comments. One, we say the charter, do we need, or does anybody think that we need to change the charter? That's one topic. And the other is, are there better ways for us to be more, effective and be happy? So if I look at from those two angles, I'd like to say maybe we'll leave the charter alone and figure out if we can do some things better and become happier by finding solutions, primarily I guess working with the responsible parties in MPART or in Eagle or the governor. If there are ways that we can communicate better, I will be happy.
Thanks, Joe. Actually, by some of the email chain that went between members, there are people who are in agreement that we should not touch the charter. That if things come up, that we should deal with each individual thing, and that's fine. It also has been brought up as far as communication, that possibly the COG as well is not communicating very well with agencies. So, that's something we can definitely work on. Stacy. Stacy?
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lynn. Do you want to go ahead? Because Stacy doesn't seem to be answering.
Okay, I didn't know if you got us mixed up. Okay. Yeah, well, I have thoughts about what you said, Mary. Things are a lot different than I thought they would be when I started a couple of years ago. I feel like people who had more leadership roles or would speak up more have kind of not put that into the COG, but have worked off in other capacities and other groups. And I feel like when I attend these meetings, unfortunately, I feel it's mostly for education, but I don't feel like I'm out there helping to protect and support other communities. And I know there's a lot of people that really would benefit if clearly we had better ways of notifying them and educating them. But it seems like we have 2 or 3 COGs within the COG. I don't feel there is a unity of purpose that I felt perhaps earlier on. And so I don't attend with a sense that we're going to really accomplish anything. Unfortunately, I might learn something, but as far as something measurable, I can hope that our thoughts and opinions filter their way through to some of the officials who are listening. And I believe that does happen. But again, we just don't know. It's nothing that we have measurable. But I feel like we do not have a strong central purpose. And for that reason, when people point to Michigan as the state that has a COG, I sometimes feel frustrated because I don't know how effective we've really been in certain ways, having been there from very early on. So I feel, I suppose maybe the word is a bit dispirited or not as hopeful about the effect that we actually can really have, except that, you know, it's more of a title. Anyway.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Lynn. Do you have any suggestions as to how we might be able to come together as a group? If you think that we have like divisions within the COG?
I don't know. I feel like we all come at it for different reasons and different perspectives. I just would certainly like to have some achievable goals. I mean, I think it's great to involve the governor. I think it's great to involve Mr. Roos. I mean, they ought to hear. Why we're not saying anything against anybody. We're just saying we are citizens. We've lived in the trenches of this. We've witnessed a lot of heartache, and these are concerns that, for whatever reason, budget, staff, lack of authority, I don't know, not in the law, but that we really need you to help work with us because we think it's this important. I think that we should be advocating for the other citizens in our state who are oblivious to this, and that should give us the courage to keep stepping out and not get involved and lost in modifying, let's say, a charter or this or that, because that can just take up a lot of time. It's not a matter of words. I would really like to feel that there were measurable actions that we could achieve. That's all.
Thank you.
But, yeah.
Mary, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, well, I got both my phone and my computer going, so I don't know which one you're hearing. But Lynn's pretty accurate. When I started this, I actually thought there would be solutions. I thought there would be site-specific assistance, and it's not. And that's what I expected and hoped of the COG.
So are you still on, Stacy?
I am.
Is there anything that you can think of that would be helpful as far as the COG trying to?
Yes, if it's Connie Boris, if it's Lynn, if it's anybody in this group that has specific issues that need addressing by Eagle or by an agency, there should be a meeting. There should be communication. If we don't communicate, we aren't going to solve anything.
When you say a meeting, are you talking a COG meeting or are you talking with the
No.
agencies?
So if it's enforcement about wetlands, if it's here in Holly or if it's in Rockford, whatever the primary concerns are by the citizens that are on boots on the ground, we should be able to communicate with people that have abilities.
Thank you, Stacy. Did you have anything else?
No, that's good.
Thanks. Is there anybody else who would like to share an opinion? One of the topics that had been considered for this meeting was the possibility of inviting Phil Roos, Director Phil Roos, to come back to the COG. We did have him as a guest when he first took over. And I'm wondering for the September meeting, if members would think it would be a good idea to invite him back to share his perspective on how things have gone and any successes and accomplishments and where things might go in the future, but also to bring up the public notification document. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I like that.
Thanks, Joe. Tony?
Yeah, I support that as well.
Thank you. Rick?
Yeah, I support that too. And I think we as a group need to take a look at MPART's response to our document on public notification. I still think there was a number of people that voted against the document. That there was still a majority that pushed it through, but I think some of the comments that Eagle made, we should take them to heart, and maybe we should try and revise that document into something that's more implementable. That's just my feeling on it. I don't think we have something that you can implement based on that particular draft.
Thanks, Rick. Bill?
Thank you. I'm open to meeting with the head cheese again. That was a good meeting and getting updates, and also moving forward with the idea of continued notification and some sort of system of just general public awareness, and when that should occur and who should be doing it, and working as a team with the state in a positive way.
Thank you. Connie?
Yeah, I think we should do that as well. Tell Mr. Roos in advance that we would want his specific comments on the public notification document that we prepared. I disagree with Rick that it is not implementable. I know that we put a ton of work into addressing every single issue that we figured would come out and where Eagle would need to respond. So have him look at that in-depth document and have him be prepared, because we want some answers. If there's anything that I am just getting more and more frustrated with, it's a lack of transparency on the part of Eagle. And it just seems to go on and never stops. So prepare him in advance with what we're going to ask, and then let's have him give us an answer.
Thanks, Connie.
Mary?
Rick,
Mary,
did you
this
have
is Lynn
another?
again.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi, is someone else going? It's hard when I'm on a phone. I'm sorry.
That's
Well,
okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Lynn. I was going to talk, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I see both sides of this with the public notification. I think the fact that it's remained unresolved it's a downer. It's a failure, I think, of coming together as a group somehow. And I can see what Rick is saying about how, I mean, we cover every possible thing, and that is daunting. I don't see why we couldn't work with both, and to say, well, this is like, it's kind of like what our speaker said tonight. I mean, it'd be great if we could do everything, but at least stop drinking the water. Well, we may not be able to cover everything about notification, but we could at least shore up some things and feel that we accomplished it. And I don't think it's, a matter of the document itself. I think it's the people behind it recognizing that, yes, this is ideal, and yes, what can we do? We may not be able to reach the idea, but what can be done? So, but I absolutely support working with a director. I think this director would be willing to hear us. And I also have to balance out what Connie said about the Eagle. That's not my experience across the board. My experience has been that there have been some very good and transparent people. I feel maybe fortunate that has over time been the case here in our neck of the woods. And I also know what it's like to absolutely feel like boulders are being thrown down on your efforts and everything is being obfuscated, because I've had that experience too. But I think to be able to still remain positive and remember the good, as well as understanding that it's uneven. And we're dealing with human nature here, finally. I mean, I think about the PFAS and the forever chemical, and I think the real problem is the greed and the hard-heartedness on the part of profits over people and health, and people willing to or turning away from that. And we're dealing with human nature, and that's never easy. So, but getting something done and being able to say that, yes, we kept moving forward, to me, that's a good thing. And that's what I think brings momentum. So there it is.
Thanks, Lynn. Rick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, we've got this public notification document, and I think we need to take what's in there and try and apply it to, 4 or 5, it could be 1 or 2, just sites and see if it works. I'd be willing to take that document and give it to Karen Vorse and just say, hey, you've got to do this from now on. This is what we want you to do as far as communications. And I just see it as being very burdensome. It says direct notification of all potentially affected people. I mean, we don't know what that means. There's definitely people that are affected in Rockford, and there's definitely people that are potentially affected. But anyway, I don't want to go into a lot of details, but there's a lot of things in that public notification document that need to be fleshed out and need to take look at individual sites and say, how would this apply to this particular site? I don't think we did that, and I think we should be doing that.
Thanks, Rick. Connie?
Yeah, for public notification to affected parties, we did say you can do something similar to an Amber Alert, only be called a PFAS alert. And that's a pretty simple thing that can be done. Or put an article in a newspaper in the relevant area that's being affected, or do a radio announcement. So, we did try to give several different options for Eagle to make it known that, hey, folks, we've got a problem here. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Connie. Do any other members have any thoughts on what's been successful or not successful with the COG?
I am glad to be in the know about things as they come up. I appreciate being able to hear Abby's updates, and I appreciate hearing about what other communities are up against. I think we all ought to be cheering each other on, and I think we do to a certain degree. So I feel positive about that.
Thanks, Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
Rick?
I think the website has been improved. I mean, we certainly wish we had more resources, but I think, you know, the website over the last 2 years certainly has gotten much better. And I also really enjoy, you know, sitting in on some of those public official meetings, because I would encourage more people to do that, because that's exactly what we're talking about, is how well is MPART communicating, and then, you know, what kind of knowledge do the people have that the people that are involved with those sites. I mean, sometimes they're townships, sometimes they're individuals, but it's a varied mixture of governmental officials and, you know, responsible parties. So I think that's really good, and I again would encourage more people to do that. So and I think we're taking good steps on the public public notifications, but I really think we need to look at whatever we propose and then apply it to particular sites and see if it works. And I did not see, maybe I'm reading the document wrong, Connie, but I don't see options in the document. It just says do this, do that, do that. I don't see that you can do different options. So, but anyway, we can discuss that later.
Thanks, Rick. Kelly?
I just wanted to say, so I've sat through these meetings since 2019, and I'll be honest
Kelly,
with
I'm not
you,
sure if it's me or that, but I can hardly hear you.
I've sat in these meetings since 2019, and I'll be honest with you, this group, just thinking about all the different conversations wakes me up at night, keeps me up at night, because I see how hard this team is working, trying to help citizens in the state, doing the best that we can with the resources that we have. In regards to the public notification document, we offered to come to the table to find some workable solutions. And we were met with resistance with that. So we're all trying to do the same thing. How do we all get on the same team?
Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate where you're coming from, and I appreciate the fact that you see it from the side where Eagle is working very hard. And I think that the majority of COG members also recognize that Eagle does work really hard. And I agree that I think whether it's meetings together or meetings with the group, like Rick had suggested, maybe going back over it, I don't know. But I'm open to doing that. And like Rick said, with the local official calls, those have been really helpful. I have attended several, or most of them actually. The one thing for me with the local officials calls that's very encouraging is that usually when it gets to the question and answer part, the first or second thing that is brought up is the local officials saying, when can we have a meeting? Our residents are going to want to know. And unfortunately, there are other people like Holly that we did not get that response from our local leaders. And it's very gratifying to see that other communities do get that. Pam.
Thanks for allowing me to speak. You know, Kelly just made what I think is probably a pretty profound statement. And I want to add this. There's a lot of new COG members that was not on in the beginning when MPART was in its inception. And I have to say that here in our community, here in the Otsego area, I've been out on the ground with Eagle when we were doing water sampling and soil sampling. And I personally witnessed people telling us they're going to shoot us if we didn't get off the property. They didn't want to know what their well water was going to read as. They had, and obviously they had concerns, right? That the value of their home, if they knew, was going to make a difference. And they were fearful. But I have to tell you that I didn't witness anything but 100% compassion for those from the workers from Eagle that was there. The EPA was there at that time with a couple of their members. And I think that something that really, truly, we all need to take into consideration. You know, we can sit back and assume that the other party isn't doing the best that they can do or all that they should do. But I will say this. I think that until we sit in their shoes, and like Kelly says, you know, you stay up at night thinking about what can we do to bring unity together. And that's what this was supposed to be all about. It does seem like there's a lot of segregation here. I'm not sure really why that is. And, you know, I was out for a while, as you all know, with COVID. But I can say this. I've had plenty of opportunities throughout the years and being a leader in my area that I've never once witnessed or experienced that Eagle didn't care, that the EPA didn't care, that MDHHS didn't care. The protocol is something that the public doesn't understand. I don't think those people working in those departments, I'm sure that they want answers just as quickly as what we do. And, you know, I have witnessed personally that sometimes when you show your hand or you say too much, then it gets misconstrued. And, you know, we all know what the media does, right? And you give them a little bit of information. Something that I'm really frustrated and disappointed about, and not a lack of anybody that's on this COG or any of the departments, you know, state and federal agencies. It's that I really get irritated that the media will really draw attention to a problematic area or maybe a contaminated site or community. And they speak about that, but whoever talks about remediation, the public sits out here and they're so fearful of what the unknown is. But I think that we, as a COG member, I know that Gail Dugan and I do this quite often, is that we talk about there's solutions sometimes. Is there solutions to people's health, you know, that have been affected by this? Sometimes not. But I will say this. There is no reason why that a bunch of grown adults can't get together for the betterment for our future, for the health of our futures and our communities. And I will attest and I will stand strong against this. But I have never once in all the years that I've been out with Eagle on the ground, I didn't see one of them. And actually, I don't even think they must have been paid enough for their job because I could not believe how they were treated, all that they had to go through. Do they make mistakes? I think that we all do at times. And sometimes, you know, you get the hot potato in your lap. And I've seen that happen over and over again with Abby. I've seen it with Steve Sliver when he was here. I just don't think it's so fair to always poke fingers when I think that really, truly, we need to find resolution compared to assuming that they don't care. If Kelly's staying up at night because this bothers her, that's because she cares, right? We're all adults here. I think we need to come back together and we need to stay strong. And that's what this COG was set out to be, to begin with, that was supposed to be the goal. And it just seems like there's so much segregation. I'm not really sure why that is, but I don't think that this group, it warrants it. I think we need to come together.
Thank you, Pam. Appreciate that. Tony.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for their comments. I think that as I think about what the COG has accomplished and sort of reflect on some of the comments, and using public notification as an example, I'm certainly not satisfied with where we are right now on that. But I will say that I think that the discussion, as frustrating at times as it has been, has helped to potentially, I think, reshape the way that the things are approached. It's in my mind, it's not so much a function of effort, but a function of perspective and mindset. And for those of us who have been in the position, and it has happened, it's happened to me, it's happened to my neighbors, it happened to people in Flint, it happened to people in Benton Harbor, that there was information that was known, that if it had been communicated in a more timely fashion by a matter of years, there are things that we could have done to change our habits, our behavior, to avoid risks that came to pass. And so I think that bringing that perspective is really important. And I think that we still have a ways to go. I think it's important that we have a vehicle to do that. We don't always agree, but we have a vehicle to do that never existed before. And I mean, I'm not saying that we need to like say we're all done and we've accomplished all sorts of wonderful things, so that's great. But I think it's important to recognize there's a vehicle here that didn't exist before. There could be disagreement. There may continue to be some disagreement, but I think that bringing the perspective of people who are impacted and have this impact their lives in many, many ways, I think it's important that perspective continue to be communicated to folks in Eagle, and that Eagle, communicate the limitations and the restrictions that it has to operate under. So, having said all that, I do think that we can do more on the public notification, and I hope that we're able to find a way, maybe working with Director Roosh, maybe chatting with others, to move that issue forward. So anyways, those are just my thoughts.
Thanks, Tony. Bill.
I'm coming. There you are. Thank you. I'm happy to be in this vehicle, by the way, Tony, and everybody. That's a good way to say it. Sometimes the front seat and the back seat aren't always talking, or the passenger, or we're not on the same wavelength, and that's probably okay. I have enjoyed my perspective listening. I think it's been 5 years, either 19 or 18. This started 2019, maybe. Has it really been 5 years? Anyway, I live in a city. The city drives me nuts sometimes because our lakes, Cadillac and Mitchell, they've had PFAS in it. Testing's probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. I just happened to stumble on it. Probably the only person in the city that cares. I'm worried that other than our state workers who do work here and keep their nose to the grindstone, but it doesn't get publicized. People are eating fish, for example. Maybe it's low levels and it's typical to other lakes, and there's no source being found. We have Superfund sites here that are managed by the EPA, but they're working with Eagle. Eagle's had 2 sets of tests from our Superfund site, 21 and 22. Those are 2 years. The EPA only holds the 2021 test, and the city holds on to the 2021 test. Eagle has both the test, AECOM, probably testing facility, or agency everybody's familiar with that I think our state uses, but this was an EPA site. They're holding on to one of two tests. The community is not told. We have a utilities director that goes on TV 9 and 10, indicates that the cleanup is complete. Wants some wells shut. He doesn't expect to find PFAS under the industrial park while he's in his possession, holding on to tests that shows it's there. Just frustrating to see. I suppose the reporter could have made a mistake that wasn't on tape, and I've asked her to look it up to see if he actually said that, because there just seems to be not a transparent or willingness to be transparent. You know, our city manager should have said, hey, we've had PFAS since 2021 under industrial park. We didn't allow the testing. Eagle went around us and did it with the EPA, which is what I think happened. I haven't figured it out yet. And we're not letting them come through our LDFA system, knowing that there's PFAS down there. I mean, these guys are fighting information that we should know, and one of the things could be a source. They could reopen this ROD that was set up in '87, realizing that presumably the plating company could be responsible, I'm guessing, but they want to pinpoint it, and it needs to be dealt with. Our LDFA equipment needs to be upgraded and fixed up so it works for PFAS as well. And it's just frustrating to watch that head in the sand and the darkness, the protection of either property owners or corporations, profits over people. Just the mentality still is there, and it's right here in my city. I was the mayor for 6 years, county commissioner 7, city council member 5, 18 years of being elected, and about 11 years out of that. It's much better to be outside. I was thinking of joining the LDFA board, but I think I'm more effective on the outside. Anyway, I appreciate this group because I hear frustration, and wasn't going to say much today, but I'm not saying I'm totally frustrated, but I get disillusioned even at a local level in how municipalities handle what should be something so easy, is just communicating to the public updates of things that are going on. We had our city municipal wells in the lower aquifer under the Superfund sites. There were 2 of them, and they never seemed to merge together. We were lucky, and our wells are moved, but which was the plan for 20 years. Anyway, I lose trust in local government, and I need the state to be more open. I need the EPA to have everything. They should be doing their work. They have got new MCLs, I'll call them, that might not be enforceable, but they're out there, and they should be adhered to without having to enforce them. But I just do appreciate the knowledge, background, perspective, the differences of opinions, even where we're all starting out, I think, on the same page. Let's get clean water. Let's warn people if it's not. And let's shut down this PFAS production so it someday maybe will go away. We're 30 years out of the Superfund site, and it's still sitting under a very likely subject. And the rest of the industry has been telling our newspaper they don't use PFAS, haven't used it. It's not going through the sewer, yet it's showing up there. In any event, sorry to ramble. Just appreciate everyone's comments. I think we all should glue together, stick together, hunker down, work with the state, and recognize they're humans too, and that they are with us, but might be working through some red tape. With that said, I want to thank everybody for their input and constant vigilance to have a better state of Michigan when it comes to a chemical like this and getting rid of it.
Thanks, Bill. Joe.
Yes, quickly, I like to kind of summarize it in my own mind, because I think when I signed up, I knew how hard it is to give advice to somebody. And I think we're making good progress. I think from a big picture standpoint, let's keep the charter as is, but then let's find more ways to work with Eagle, MPART, and in the coming month, and create our own legacy and success stories in the coming month and years. That's all.
That's awesome, Joe. Thanks. John. John, did you have your hand up?
We're not hearing you, John. So thanks for that.
Pam, I'm assuming maybe you had raised your hand earlier. Did you have anything else to add?
I did not. Did I? I clicked on it, so I didn't know if my hand went down. But I will say this too. I am so appreciative to be a part, of this. I appreciate both sides, and I know that there's a lot of passion from the COG members, as well as I said, with the state and federal agencies. I know that the future will be stronger as a result of all of us giving our time and our effort and respecting, the other person's, point of view. And I think that Tony says it best, when we're gonna disagree. There's no doubt about that, but we can grow from that, and we have grown from that. I think that where we began and where we are today, we've come a long way. Are we where we need to be? Absolutely not. But we'll pass the torch off someday, right, to a younger generation that won't have to pioneer as hard as what we all have.
Mm-hmm. And if, Mary, if I can take the last 1 minute, I'll just take 1 minute because we're over on time. Sure. I'll leave you guys with some of what I think is optimistic, big picture stuff. We have come a very, very long way since the charter since we started PFAS in 2017 and since the COG was formed. I wasn't there at those initial meetings, but I can tell you that even just in the last 3 years, we've come a long way. You guys don't see all the behind the scenes things that we've done. We've taken your input and put it into practice in so many different ways. And not only that, but I get to see the fact that we have, we're going out and talking with other states regularly about tricks and tips and how to communicate with their residents. So the ripple effects of the work that you guys do on this COG, I know it doesn't feel like you're accomplishing what you want to get out there and do great big things, but the ripple effects are profound. And so because we've been able to take all the input that you guys have been able to provide and take the essence of that public notification document and get it out there and share it with other states and just really let them know that, protection of public health is first. We've got to do that first before we do anything else. You got to let your residents know, and you got to get out there and get them filters, get them something. And so we've been able to pass that message on. We've got a meeting with Ohio. They want to know how we've done it. They want to know how we've communicated, what kind of information have we been sharing, those kinds of things. So never feel like these meetings are in vain. Never feel like your efforts are not going towards a positive, because they are. And I can see from the big picture that you know, the effects of the work that we're all doing here in Michigan are having a profound effect on the rest of the country as well. So I'll leave it there. Happy to talk with anybody that wants to talk afterwards, but you know, I think we've got we're way over on time. So Mary?
Can I give one last thing? You know, I appreciate that you, and I know Kelly has mentioned too, that you are using, and Brandon Thomas, he regularly comes on the Engaging the Public and goes back and shares that with the constituents that he works with. It might be helpful to the COG members if you were to share specific instances or specific, you know, just so that we know, you know, how that works. So thank you. And thank you to Dr. Alan Ducketman for joining us. And thanks everybody for speaking up tonight. It was very helpful to hear all the opinions. We'll get some notes out to people, and thanks very much for attending and for hanging in there with us. Take care.
See you in July. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.